Ladies and gentlemen, dear Bob, thank you very much for the invitation to this 24th New Zealand Companion Animal Conference in October 2013. I would have loved to be with you, but being a Zurich-based attorney at law in Switzerland, unfortunately I couldn't make it for this time, but I thank you very much for your flexibility taking me at least electronically. I can't wait to join New Zealand soon. I want to go through with you to the question why animals do matter, a short overview on the aspect of what is ethics, what is law, what is the difference, what is the common ground. We will go through a roadmap for the animal in the law, and this is the place where we'll step in this New Zealand Animal Welfare Amendment Bill 2013 more closely. Why it's important to give animals a voice in criminal procedures, in administrative procedures, and how to give them a voice, and we'll end up with a summary. Let us start with the question why animals matter. There are a lot of books on that, and I do see this more from a personal point of view. I started with animal welfare law, being interested in the issue in 1980, so it makes about 30 years ago, and I wrote several books on that. I created, beside my normal law firm, the Foundation for the Animal in the Law, with the biggest library on the issue in Europe on the animals in law and ethics. And we have also a collection of all the court cases. What was the motivation for me to do so? The motivation was I was not so, and I still am not so much an animal hugger or an animal lover, but I do think, and I thought then also when stepping in the matter, that animals are important in our society. They play an important role. No society without animals, not only as far as food is concerned. I'm a vegetarian for 30 years now. I do not need it for food, but for clothes, for having companion animals is an important issue. They do play an important role in, of course, from the economical background, a life without animals would be completely so unthinkable. Also knowing that human beings, after all, are just also vertebrates, so animals by themselves. What matters to me is also, as far as my private daily life is concerned, that I wanted to say yes to the product and also yes to the production. So knowing that animals are used, or some people say abused, for animal testing. I try to avoid medication where animals are used for testing or for hospital reasons. Eating vegetarian is also a way, or even vegan, I'm not a vegan, a way of taking care of the animals that are beings just in another life form. I'm quite sure, personally, of the idea that animals do have also a soul, like discussed for decades in Christianism, in other religions. So I just am, let's say, thankful of being a human being and not an animal, but I see that animals do feel similar to us, do think similar to us, and if we do not understand the behavior or the pattern of animals, then it's not because there is less, but it's more that we are not able to step in the behavior of animals. So I have a deep respect of what animals can do, and it's an obligation that we take much more respect to animals and stop abusing them, and we'll have a big discussion of where does use end and what when does abuse start. Saying no to the production means also that we make our personal life more consistent when we can stand behind the products that we use in our daily life, what we avoid to, and as far as I do know, and it's not to make friends by that, I do like, for example, my leather shoes, but knowing that they last, if it's a high quality, for about 20, 30 years, my oldest ones are 30 years old and still in very good shape, then I need less of them, and it's high quality, and I think it's also from the background of sustainable development and sustainable developing economical reasons, that instead of buying 3 pairs of leather shoes a season, I have just a few and they count a lot. So you can do also the same, to be very much more careful to animal products if you still think that you like them and you need them. As far as meat consumption is concerned, I do not see really why we should eat meat or eat fish. This is your personal point of view. A strong movement in society thinks that it's completely unnecessary to do so. There are a lot of other impacts, environmental impacts, economical impacts. The animal suffering is gorgeous as far as traditional, old-fashioned meat, also fish production is concerned. On the other hand, if we speak about law, it's about having majorities in legislations, and as long as vegetarians only count 3 to 9% of a society worldwide, it's not very realistic to think that they will make a majority. So I like to focus on what works for the animals with the support of the majority of the parliament, of the governments, and also of the society. Animals matter, and this is why we should stand up for animals, also for plants, also for other human beings, of course. Let us focus on animals. The ethics is the main source of the relationship of human beings. Some people say we're human beings and not only human doings. But now, as far as the animal is concerned, it's the ethics that say, although in most of the times human beings are stronger, have much better weapons, and now high-tech possibilities to get rid of animals, to kill them, to slaughter them, etc., etc., it's our obligation to have the protection of other life forms in the earth better protected. So it's the ethics to do so, also a strong source of our behavior towards animals. Has a religion background. From my point of view, the religious background should be taken much more seriously, or at least we should take the best out of the religion. Let's speak on ethics first, because ethics versus law has no binding character, meaning it cannot be enforced. Ethics as prescribing how we should behave, how we should take animals also into our mindset in the society, is often a little bit reduced to the personal opinion a person has. So if you speak, for example, to a farmer that for decades is abusing and badly slaughtering his animals, you are against these practices, he will say your ethics is just a personal opinion, and he will say his ethics is about, he sees no suffering in his way he treats his animals, and he thinks that human beings are number one, and if he can make a good money and support his family and his children and his grandchildren from him, the world is okay. So it's kind of, you are stepping, when you reduce the animal issue on the ethical aspect that is very important. You will have endless discussions, and I see when I compare now these social discussions worldwide that in the 80s, in the 1990s, ethics were kind of a common playground. We spoke of the Club of Rome about sustainable development, how important it is to have ethics on the boat. It's a little bit, from my point of view, backlash, and the ethics are playing a minor role in society. This is why legislation is so important as far as our relationship to animals are concerned. I say that not only because I'm an attorney at law in Switzerland for about 30 years, and I made great research on the animal in the law, but it's also because I do see, and I'm convinced of that the legal aspect is key. It is key because then you can enforce what ethics prescribe. And if we are making laws, they have to be enforced, otherwise we just can replace them through wishing lists. When we make legislation, we must know that we have to reduce the content of what we personally think is ethically relevant to a point that we find a majority in Parliament, in the public, in the government to say yes to certain practices or measurements and our way we treat animals. Meaning, and this is also one pattern of this New Zealand Animal Welfare Amendment Bill 2013, instead of describing, I would have loved that paradise is described, or they would say, I would dream of the idea that animals are not allowed to be used at all. The majority says yes to a certain way of using animals, but it's not paradise described therein, it's minimal standards, meaning the majority, the government thinks that the majority of the politics and the public opinion will say yes at least to these minimal standards. For a lot of us now in this conference, these minimal standards are ethically not enough. We do think, and in a lot of aspects, it's just the really, really, really minimum of what is just not an animal abuse or animal mistreatment, but the basic thinking is reduce the ethical content to what is practicable and possible in a society during this period of time. So, meaning finding majorities in public and parliament imposes us in the conference and all those that do think we should more stand up for animals to find majorities in the way we speak to journalists, to the publics and to the politicians, maybe sometimes not thinking too much of what our just personal belief is. We need to think we have to make steps ahead in a society as a whole. Let me talk now shortly on a roadmap for the animal in the law. When I do that, then it's about stepping into a research I made with the support of the Foundation for the Animal in the Law in Switzerland of more than 30 legislations worldwide. What is the standard of the animal in the law therein? We did not only compare the cage sizes or the transportation hours, and so on and so forth. My aspect is more, beside those important details for the daily life or the daily suffering of animals, my aspect is more of how is an animal treated in legislation of the society as a whole. This is why I love this American justice balance so much that I got from my US-based American brother when I passed my law exams hundreds of years ago, because for me it's a symbol. I just put a long time ago just one human being and my beloved elephant that I got from my mom thereon, and I thought, looking at this, it shows that human beings and animals should be in balance, and it's our duty as human beings that do care for animals in society to bring more weight to the animals, so that at least in legislation and also in law enforcement, that there is a balance between the human's interests and the animal's interests. Just to say, because humans, technically spoken, are stronger than animals, does not give us the right to make them always, let's say, number two and less important than human beings. The discussions of let's just use animals for fur, for being eaten, for also meaningless animal experimentation, or for cruel behavior in sports, just for our pleasure, just to start the discussion to say we as human beings are entitled to be number one, is, from my point of view, disbalanced when we cut the animal's interests in well-being, having a good life, having being healthy, having space, being able to express itself, and also being protected in its dignity. The thinking is that we should see that humans and animals' interests should be brought into the balance. This is why I did a little fake there on that they are really in balance. Let's step in a roadmap for the animal in the law, then focusing on what the proposal is of New Zealand. First, from my point of view worldwide, it's important to have animals in constitutions. I do know that there is no written constitution in New Zealand. I cannot step too much into details into that. But there are fundamental rights of human beings, like having the right of property, of making business, of commerce, of expressing himself also in doing animal experiments or fishing and hunting. These are often interpretation of basic human rights. As long as animal welfare is not on the constitutional level, on the same level of to be protected as fundamental rights of human beings, then it's always the fundamental rights of human beings that will be more powerful against the animal's interest. To bring that in balance, we should bring the animal welfare, the animal law, the animal protection perspective on the same level as fundamental rights of human beings. Then the legislator will be forced to bring them in balance. Sometimes it's the animal welfare aspect that is more important. Let's say animal cruelty in farm practices. It's not the duty of a farmer just to slaughter or to put too much unnecessary pain to his cow when slaughtering. So then the animal welfare aspect is more important. And it might be also in New Zealand to use animal mice, cats, and dogs for animal experiments, even though the suffering of the animals are remarkable for reason, for medication production, for research to find medication against really brutal human illnesses. Then the society says yes of using animals for that purpose. So then it's a decision of what is more important, animal welfare or the fundamental right. If animal welfare is still on the lower level, then the animal will suffer for hundreds of years any longer. I will step into the discussion of the dignity of creature, of the sentience of animals in another context. This is why I want to just shortly come back on the constitutional level before stepping into the New Zealand legislation. The idea of bringing animals on the constitutional level is not unique worldwide. Switzerland started with that in the 1973. So it's in the Swiss constitution, and by that it's not only the basis for a uniform welfare and welfare act, but also pushes a pressure on the state to do right as far as animals are concerned. Also, Germany changed the legal status of animals as far as the constitution is concerned, and it's also in the constitution in other countries like in Austria, in Slovenia, and for that I would foresee when speaking of animals, knowing that animals do matter, it means from a legal point of view it must step also on the constitutional level. Now let's have a look on the animals in the Welfare Act is concerned, that is in discussion now in the form of the New Zealand Animal Welfare Amendment Bill 2013. I have to admit that I thought, isn't that great to have a government to explain that the goal is to have the highest or one of the highest animal welfare standards worldwide. I love this concept because it means, if we take the wording, that a government, politicians, the majority of a society take animal welfare serious, do respect the animal's interest in its different freedoms of freedom of suffering, place enough, also acknowledge them in their social interests, and so on and so forth. So I thought this is great to have a government that is proud of its legislation and giving also a strong signal to the farmers industry, to the puppy mills or the companion animal producer industry, to the chemical industry, to say it's an ending as far as simple use for human reasons on animals. It's a yes to new forms of being together with animals. I also like very much this systematics of who does what and what the goals are as far as the enforcement of this amendment bill. I got more and more, let's say, frozen. I wouldn't say shocked, but at least disappointed by stepping more into the details, and I want to share with you some aspects of this amendment bill that, from my personal perspective as being, let's say, international consultant in the animal in the law and ethics, also as far as having been the animal welfare attorney of the canton of Zurich for 3 years, that gave animals a voice in criminal procedures. I needed then acts that were enforceable, and also based on this international overview on the animal law in more than 30 countries worldwide. Let's step a little bit into details. I'm afraid that for those who are not so interested in the law, that this more technical aspect might get a little bit boring. I want to first apologize for that, and on the other hand, try to motivate you to take legal aspects in animal welfare matters more seriously, because otherwise, as we all know in this conference room, it's difficult and boring to just speak with politicians, with farmers, with representatives of the chemical pharmaceutical industry. If it's not legal, it's not binding. So open up a little bit to the idea that what was the a little bit the saying of this importance of being, instead of being earnest, the importance of being legal. So I declare the positive aspects, that the goal is to be worldwide leading. I declared the positive aspect of the courage to step out of the dark and to take the issue of animal welfare more seriously. What is proposed is partly not satisfying, and the big thing is what is missing. Let me start with the proposals on the table. Generally speaking, I do think that the content is presumably not on the level society is made believed of being very high. If ever this law is enforced, and if the New Zealanders do go to these farms or to animal experiment farms where they are kept, or to puppy breeders, still, if it is enforced, I do think that a lot of you will be disappointed of what is looked at being animal welfare standard. By that, we have to recognize that these minimal standards, as far as the international implication is concerned, is very, very low, and in some aspects we are quite far off having them now in our farms in New Zealand. Probably the society is meant to believe that it's one of the highest standards worldwide. If we go into details in several aspects, then it's much behind of what is, let's say, daily standard in several countries in Europe, in the European Union. And for that, if you are making this big work on animal welfare legislation in New Zealand, just step into the international comparison.
The only reason that we would be able to continue with sow crates is if consumers were kept in the dark about it. In other words, this was kept secret.
This pig farm is truly horrific.
It's like a living nightmare, and these animals live here every day of their lives.
It's disgusting and it needs to stop.
Every minute they're in those crates,
It's hell for them. They're not living. They're just basically just waiting to die.
John Darrick had planned a 2-night stay on top of this farm silo.
Calling for the government to bring about a complete phase-out of factory farming in New Zealand.
Shocking new footage has emerged of pigs at the same Levin farm exposed by TVNZ's Sunday programme more than a year ago.
There's blood all over her ear, all over her body, all over the bars that are confining her, and all over the cell next to her.
In New Zealand, pork industry is absolutely committed to animal welfare.
This is an interview, I guess, and I would love it if you'd answer my question.
How many times do we have to come on the programme and say exactly the same thing for no result?
The real tragedy is that those pigs have been in those crates since my king sold them 15 months ago. They haven't come out. They suffered for every single day.
By the 3rd of December 2015, the use of sow crates will not be an option for the pork industry in New Zealand.
A controversial plan to extend the zoo's elephant enclosure has been given a go-ahead.
Zoo elephants have a range of health problems which aren't found in wild elephants, and the problems that Kishan had were quite typical of zoo elephants.
Zoos are actually moving away from keeping elephants in zoo enclosures because it is not in their interest.
Catch a Cray has been operating in 7 or 8 pubs around the North Island.
Hunters pay to catch their own crayfish using a metal claw.
Those crays are walking around, happy little chappies.
Patrons and protesters sharing their thoughts about this, the Catch a Cray.
These machines will catch the crayfish about 30 times, like handling them, before they're finally dragged out of the machine.
Mainstream New Zealand doesn't like to see animals being abused. And
they aren't being abused, Mr. Creek. They aren't being abused. Here is the evidence.
They were the forgotten victims of the Christchurch earthquake. But all that's changed with the setting up of Animal Aid, a group determined to look out for the animals of the devastated city.
Unfortunately, there's a lot of people leaving animals behind, and we're going out and checking out the situation and leaving food for the animals if need be.
This is factory farming on a massive scale. You can see tens of thousands of birds in this shed. The cages are stacked 8 high, and each of the cages has got 5 or 6 birds in it. And you can see they have no freedom of movement at all.
It never ceases to amaze me every time I come onto a battery netting farm at the absolute cruelty that is involved in this industry. I just had to be a part of this to try and make people aware of how absolutely revolting this industry is.
Carl Scott plans to spend the next month in a cage. It's his way of drawing attention to the plight of battery hens.
I want people to think, what would it be like in a cage for my entire life?
It's called an enriched colony.
Like nest, perch, scratch.
Just changing your name doesn't make it any less of a cage.
Currently, battery hens have about this much space in a cage. With the new colony cages, wowee, they're going to have that much space.
I'm not so satisfied by the structure, saying let's just give the raw structure in the bill, so in the legislation now, and we will step into details once that this bill has passed through the political process. Because when stepping into the details, the animal welfare aspect is, when I see that politically in other legislation as far as politics are concerned, the deeper you go, so if it's not the public involved but only the politicians, and by the end of the day only the administration, then it gets more and more animal weak, so less animal friendly. It would be nice to oversee what the content of the legislation is with the details now, that we are able to say yes to it or no. If we keep it to the administration, we risk, this is what happened also decades ago in Switzerland, in Germany, if we leave it to the state, then the animal often suffers by the end of the day. I am not very convinced, the next aspect, to have the Ministry of Primary Production also being responsible for animal welfare. They might be charming and warm-hearted and motivated also to stand up for the animal welfare, but do not forget that their interest and their political goal, written also in legislation, is to represent the interests of animal users, so of the farmers and not of the cows. It depends on the issue of the puppy breeders and not of the dogs and cats. So we made big steps ahead. Speaking now of Switzerland, also in Germany, when we took the responsibility for the animal welfare away from this ministry and we created a new one, or at least a branch in another ministry that is concerned about the inner aspects of Switzerland. When we changed the responsible ministry, that it was quite clear that the animal users are represented by one industry and the animal protectors, the animal welfareists, are together with another ministry. In Germany, for example, this other ministry also deals with public health, and I would strongly recommend to have a close relationship between animal welfare and animal so also with the veterinarians, because the veterinarians, although as far as animal welfare is concerned, they are often or too often, let's say, money driven and paid by the animal owner and not, of course, by the animal, but at least they do know what is good for the animals, and they play more and more an important role as far as public health is concerned. And public health more and more also contains aspects of animals' health and also animal welfare. So having them in the same ministry would at least be a first step of transparency as far as the recognition of animal welfare is concerned. Let's step in the different topics shortly of this New Zealand Animal Welfare Amendment Bill 2013. As far as farm animals are concerned, let's remember that battery cages, for example, were banned in Switzerland as of January 1st, 1992. The ban was spoken out in 73, 78, so this was the phasing out. Also, Sweden had a ban on battery cages, and also now the EU has one. Also, as far as sow stalls are concerned, they are banned in Switzerland, also banned now in the EU and in different other countries. It's a very brutal way of keeping sows. So I do not see exactly why New Zealand, with this high standard, is not banning it now, and the discussion should be open maybe about the phasing out within 5 years or 10 years, knowing exactly that this form of animal housing is not animal friendly at all. I was a little bit shocked when I saw the list of legalized animal mistreatments, meaning a list of those cuttings and behavior that we can do to animals that are just legalized by declaring them not to be an infraction of the Animal Welfare Act. In every time of revising the laws, these lists should be shortened, also in New Zealand. Taking less regards is important as far as the farmer's interest in practicability is concerned. To declare that it's legal to have animals in a way that it is practicable for the farmer means that the animal suffering is legalized just by the fact that it's not so comfortable for the farmer to do like this or that. The practicability or the economical interest of farmers should not be overweighted against animals' interest. Let me remind you this balance. It's about regaining the pride of the farmers that should be liberated by the legislator in keeping animals under conditions that they know exactly it's not animal friendly. We cannot compete to very, very cheap meat production conditions like in China or also in the United States and in other cheap meat production countries. First, we have to make the discussion about eat and fish meeting as a whole, and then if there is a, let's say, worldwide speaking, small farming agricultural industry to say we have high standards of animal keeping, like for example in Switzerland, like supported by also the Swiss food chains of animal-friendly meat production. And when it's said New Zealand, we then know it's not related to animal suffering. As we see now with this legislation, this is not the case. Please do change that now. It's, I think, not the right place now with this amendment bill also to reopen the window for discussion about the probably and obvious cruelty by animal export for slaughtering, by life export. If we are taking this animal aspect seriously, if we want to regain the pride of the New Zealand farmers also on a worldwide perspective, and don't forget, I'm speaking now of Zurich in Switzerland now, it's about why not being courageous as Switzerland, as Germany was, Austria, France, Poland, Slovenia in several aspects. Why not saying we keep this export ban ahead, and we know we can be proud of our farm industry and the sheep and the strong farm sheep industry as well. As far as animal in experiments are concerned, it's nice to speak about these replace, reduce and refine 3 R's and to put them in legislation. Unfortunately, I do think it's not enough. Like in other branches of animal welfare, it's about to be aware that we speak about animal welfare legislation. Because it's not only ethics, it's about law. We have to make sure that this law can be enforced and controlled. And the controlling of the law enforcement, it's a duty of the judges. Please do tell me how these animal experiments that pass this internal commission can be brought to the judges. We have in Switzerland, for example, in the canton of Zurich, the structure that this commission and a part of this commission can go to the judges, and this is why we had a ban on 2 animal experiments with 42 monkeys, primates, macaques, by having a highest court decision against those animal experiments because the suffering was too high related to the goal of the experiment. So if we delegate this law enforcement to a committee, then we have to make sure that by the end of the day a judge must be able to decide if it's right or wrong. Now, it's a question that is very important, how to give animals a voice. Is it the public animal welfare organization like yours that organizes this beautiful conference? Is it like a public prosecutor, like an animal welfare attorney that can bring it to the judge? But why creating legislation that cannot be brought to the judges like every other legislation as well? As far as the pets, for example, are concerned, let me remind you also in another context that Switzerland is about to protect the dignity of creature in the constitution and now in the legislation, meaning that the social interest of animals and of pets especially is taken much more seriously. So hamsters, for example, must be kept in groups. Ideally, owners should keep groups of 2 or more females with a neutral male. Keeping only female hamsters is discouraged, and as they tend to fight without the presence of a male. Puppies may not be separated from their mothers before 46 days after birth. Cats must have contacts with humans each day. If this is not possible, they must have contact with other cats. So these social aspects of especially companion animals have to be protected also by New Zealand legislation. Do not forget that our way we treat companion animals, let's say within a family, plays an important role model for children within the same family. If we regard also social, emotional aspects from companion animals, they do feel reassured that this is a good way of treating animals as well. As far as the law enforcement is concerned, it's great to have those inspectors, but if we say animals do matter, knowing that they should belong, at least on a constitutional level, as well as the animal uses aspects are concerned, then these inspectors must be strengthened financially so that there are enough, that there is no political issue about having enough of them, well instructed, being very knowledgeable, being convincing, also persuasive and strong. And when they open an investigation, they should play also an important role during this investigation. And if one animal mistreaters has been set free, for example, the inspectors or other organizations should be able systematically to stand up for the animals. It's great also in New Zealand to have animal welfare organizations to play a certain role in animal mistreatment cases, but above that, it should not be a question, are they financially strong enough? Are they forced, like in Australia, to concentrate on high class, just disgusting animal mistreatment cases? Is there a possibility also in these lower cases, where the fine is lower, to give animals a voice? Because it's there about, I would say, 80–90% of the animal mistreatment is happening on the daily basis. So a long list of, internationally speaking, if we take the German Animal Welfare Act, the high standard Austrian Animal Welfare Act into account, the Swiss, of course, Animal Welfare Act into account, the standard of the European Union, that I can think, it reminds me a little bit the Elvis Presley song, Return to Sender. Why not taking this occasion seriously under the international pressure as far as this export ban on sheep for slaughtering reasons is concerned, really to say, if we say we have the highest standard of animal welfare worldwide, just do it. What lacks is, so this is, as far as the content is concerned, what lacks and plays an important role of animals in the law as well is this aspect of legal standing of animals as an own category in civil law. As long as we only have human beings and objects, and animals are treated like objects, then we are reinforced in the thinking that the interests of human beings are more important than those of animals. We changed the legal status of animals in Switzerland, for example, in 2002. I worked on that for 13 years, having animals not being simple objects, but as a category of their own. And we changed several aspects in divorce cases as far as liability is concerned, as far as the seizing of animals is concerned. So animals play a much better balanced role in legislation. Also Germany, Austria changed that. France has several aspects where it's changed. Also, Poland declares animals not being simple objects. So this would be also a big step ahead to have this legal standard changed. Also in New Zealand we have role models worldwide, and I'd love to be helpful therein. Effective structures for making and applying laws is also, from my point of view, lacking. The animal welfare organizations are playing a minor role when I see the result now of this legislation. We should think of how to give animals a voice in law making and law applying. As the animal welfare attorney of the canton of Zurich I was for 3 years, I had about 180 cases a year that landed on my desk where I could defend the animal's interest against the animal mistreaters, to state attorneys, to judges, and to minor courts. And by that, we had a much stronger law enforcement, a much higher motivation of the policemen and the society also. Giving animals a voice shows that animal users are flexible and open and transparent and not afraid of law enforcement. If they say no to a high standard system of controlling and of law enforcement, they have to hide something. So just bring them to the mindset to say yes to better law enforcement, as we changed that in, let's say, Switzerland. I do think if we have a well-balanced weight from the animal's interest and the human's interest, you feel much easier and more welcomed in your own society. You can say then yes to the product and yes to the production if you know that society, the state, the politicians, the state veterinarian offices, etc., are taking animal welfare much more seriously. It might be an realistic resort of the debate of this animal rights discussion that raises for 30, 40 years without explicitly declare what the content of these rights is. I do think giving animals a dignity, giving animal welfare a right, or at least a weight on the constitutional level, giving animals a voice and having a high standard, a real high standard of animal welfare legislation and a high standard of law enforcement, as we can prove by collecting all the court cases in Switzerland for the last 30 years scientifically, that the animal rights debate can be deblocked by the fact that legislation is going far strengthening the animal's interest. It's not the time now, but hopefully one of the next times we stay in contact to think how we can give animals a voice. For the moment, it's sufficient to say, think of how strengthening this Animal Welfare Amendment Bill 2013 and make the discussion more open to this. As a summary, I'd like to point out that animals do matter in society, that we should step out of this anti-cruelty thinking to a pro-dignity thinking of taking the animals as sentient beings much more seriously. We should change the legal position of animals, that they are not simple objects any longer, but build a third category. Maybe long term we can discuss the aspect of property on animals, but as long as there is no real alternative to that, at least giving them a standard between objects and human beings, giving animals a voice in law making and law enforcement, making society much more human and animal friendly. This goes in one, and standing up for animal welfare amendments that, when reading through, not only you feel comfortable, but also the society, the politicians do feel comfortable, and convincing for the farmers, the pharmaceutical industry to say yes and to be proud of their way that they treat their animals. So, with the last slide, give animals a voice in law, I want to say goodbye, hope to see you soon, and a big thank you for your patience, also being open for legal aspect. Thank you very much.